Woman, an in-depth exploration of the world of women today with Sandra Elkin.
Good evening and welcome to Woman. Tonight our topic is female sexuality. Many of our mothers and grandmothers used to think that sex was for men only, and women were to submit to their husbands' demands as part of their marital duties. With the help of Kinsey, Masters and Johnson, and my two guests this evening, we have come a long way. On Woman tonight, we have part one of a two-part program that will be devoted to a discussion of female sexuality. My guests are Barbara Seaman, author of Free and Female, which is a look at the new sexual roles of women, and The Doctor's Case Against the Pill, which was the first book in the new women's movement to deal with a woman's health issue. And Dr. Mary Jane Sherfey, practicing psychiatrist in New York City and author of The Nature and Evolution of Female Sexuality. Welcome to both of you.
Thank you.
Dr. Sherfey, how do you think your grandmother would have defined her sexuality?
My grandmother was in her 80s and she died in the 1930s, so that one can imagine how she defined her sexuality. I should say that the word sex never passed her lips, and I doubt whether she experienced any form of sexuality that was pleasurable to her. She was a typical Puritan woman of the late 19th century.
Do you imagine that she ever discussed it with her husband?
It would be beyond my wildest imagination.
Barbara, how did the women that you interviewed when you wrote Free and Female define their sexuality? I mean, they are really contemporary women.
Yes, when I was researching Free and Female, for which my great inspiration was Dr. Sherfey's work. I'm very proud to be here with such a brilliant scientist. I interviewed 103 modern women who no longer went along with the idea that sex is for men at all. To them, sex was equally for women. Women were not just reacting to male sexuality, as the marriage manuals always make it seem we are. To express this point most concretely, in Dr. David Rubin's books, for example, he makes the statement that most women will fake an orgasm because they know what men want to hear. Quote. Then he goes on to tell men how to check out to find out whether the woman they're making love to is really having an orgasm. And incidentally, the directions he slips them happen to be all wrong. He says, for example, that if she has inverted nipples, that means that she's had an orgasm. No inverted nipples, not inverted, erect. No erect nipples, no orgasm, says he. And the opposite is more nearly true, actually. But in any case, the women that I interviewed have given up. The best way to summarize their attitudes is they've given up faking orgasms. They are demanding their own sexual satisfaction. They feel they have just as many sexual rights as men do.
Where has most of the information about our sexuality come from?
Well, one has to go back historically, I think, and start with Freud, because certainly he was the great pioneer, the grandfather and forefather of us all, and his notions of female sexuality have been, by now, in most respects, pretty well disproved. At least his ideas about the origin of sexuality in females, which had to do with the development of the embryo.
Mm-hmm.
And it was on the basis of the medical knowledge of the 19th century that he based his theories. And he was, as advanced as he was in his thinking, he was still a child of his times. And one mustn't expect too much from any genius. And he did not have all the answers, and he certainly did not have the right answers on female sexuality.
One must not expect too much perfect understanding of any woman's issue from any man. I think that it's a marvelous thing that women are at last taking our bodies back. or to paraphrase the Marxian term, we're seizing the means of reproduction. I think that we've said we've had it. We don't want to hear what men say about our sexual experiences anymore. We want to experience our own experiences. And it's fascinating when you stop to think that not only were the scientists who described female sexuality always male, but so were the novelists and poets for the most part. I mean, even Lady Chatterley was actually D.H. Lawrence. And quite frankly, if I may get personal, my orgasms are not like Lady Chatterley's orgasms. And like many women, I used to feel there was something wrong with me. But D.H. Lawrence was a man. She was the creation of a male fantasy. And I think Dr. Sherfey is the first woman scientist who has made a major breakthrough contribution to our understanding of female sexuality. And I think that she is really going to go down in history, her work.
You're not as angry with Freud, though, are you?
No, I think Freud made such an enormous contribution to psychiatry in so many different areas of the whole field that the mistake he made about the origin of female sexuality is such a minor part of his work that I think he's, along with Charles Darwin, the two great pioneers of the 19th century, and that I couldn't possibly be angry with him. I have his bust in the entranceway to my office.
Where's our new information coming from? I mean, we know where the old came from.
I think the new information started with Kinsey, and then the real breakthrough came with Masters and Johnson's work. And in spite of what Barbara has said here, I must make it perfectly clear that my book is only a synthesis of the work that these other people have done. I have done none of this research. And my position has been as the dwarf standing on the shoulders of the giants.
What Masters and Johnson did that was in its way very courageous was, they looked up women's hoosie-watsies and took photographs and so on. And it was very daring research, but they did not put it into a perspective that had any meaning for me and most of my friends. And Dr. Sherfey did. She integrated what they found along with anthropological studies, studies of embryology, studies of anatomy and history, and she came up with the most amazing findings about female sexuality. One of her points, of course, is that women are really the first sex, embryologically.
That's embryogenesis, right?
That's embryogenesis.
Do you want to talk about that?
All right, embryogenesis. What was discovered in the latter part of the 19th century was that the embryo seemed to be undifferentiated, but more obviously male than female. In other words, the little lump that was to develop into the penis was very obvious and very clear. And it isn't until 2 months after 7 to 8 weeks of embryological development that it becomes clear that the embryo is going to, by virtue of the genes on its chromosomes, it's going to turn into a male or a female. That little lump is either going to grow long or it's going to shrink in size and turn into the clitoris. Now, because of this apparent 2 months male lead, it was thought in Freud's time, there was just a general feeling that the female was derived from the male, that the embryo started out to be a male, and then those that had the genes for femaleness became a female. And this led to his theory that the clitoris was a rudimentary remnant of the penis, and that any clitoral sexual stimulation that occurred in childhood was infantile. If it persisted into adult life, it was a neurotic trait. And the whole idea of the clitoral woman came into existence versus the vaginal woman. The vaginal woman, of course, being the one that was the most mature. If you didn't have an orgasm, then there was something wrong. A vaginal orgasm, there's something wrong with you.
And of course, that was just a male fantasy. It's very understandable from the male's point of view that he would prefer to think that any real woman can only have an orgasm if there's a male phallus involved. And that obviously the woman who can take care of herself or have an orgasm with another woman must somehow be deficient or neurotic. And it's, of course, it's a terrifying thing to men now to learn that the male phallus is not really as central to our satisfaction as they have pretended. And of course, women probably knew this all along, but we were afraid to say so. We were so brainwashed.
Well, what did it mean when it was discovered that the embryo was primarily female?
Well, what happened was that they developed a technique in late 1950s and early 1960s of determining the sex of the embryo from any body cell. Then they discovered that if they took the whole reproductive tract of aborted fetuses and grew them in a culture medium so they could keep them alive for a couple of months, they all turned into females. Both male and female reproductive tracts became female. So that then it was obvious that instead of women being derived from men as Eve was derived from Adam's rib, things are really the reverse.
In other words, if the myth of if the Bible were being rewritten now according to modern scientific knowledge, it would have to say that God created Eve in her image, and then Adam was made from her rib. And I know that some people think that this is a very trivial issue, and they say, you know, well, who cares? Nobody takes the Bible literally anymore, except for some people, and then they're entitled to their religious beliefs and all that. However, it really is an important issue because the fact that the ERA, the Equal Rights Amendment in the United States, is having so much difficulty is due in large part to the fact that in certain states, the people really have voted against it on the grounds that it's against the Bible, that that God intended woman to be man's helpmeet and not to be his equal, you know, to be merely his accessory, as it were, and that we're not full humans. So therefore, I think it's terribly important for women to understand that actually, if there is a first sex, it's us.
I'd like to talk some more about Freud's contribution.
In what way are you thinking, Sandra?
Well, possibly, you know, the result, you know, what happened to us because of this misconception.
Well, there developed a whole literature in psychoanalysis and in psychiatry in general, in which this whole notion of the first sexuality of every female infant was clitoral in nature, and that when she got to be old enough for, when she got into be a teenager and later, what was necessary was that she transfer her sexuality from the clitoris to the vagina. Now, somehow or another, the sexuality had to jump from the clitoris to the vagina. The vagina became eroticized with maturity. And if the vagina did not become eroticized, then one had all sorts of neuroses. And many, many neurotic symptoms were blamed on the fact that the woman enjoyed clitoral sex and did not enjoy vaginal sex.
Is that the root of the vaginal versus clitoral orgasm controversy?
This is the root of the vaginal versus clitoral orgasm controversy, and now we realize it's a false controversy, and I think it's necessary that we talk a little bit about what the nature of the orgasm is. I think the most important thing to realize is that the clitoris is a highly sensitized erotogenic zone, and that by the least touch it is stimulated. The clitoris is stimulated throughout sexual intercourse by virtue of the fact that it's hooked up to the vagina by the labia. Now, if you can imagine imagine this anatomically. Every time there is thrusting during sexual intercourse, this automatically stimulates the clitoris, so that the orgasm occurs as a result of the thrusting during vaginal intercourse, but it occurs because of clitoral stimulation, so that we have a vaginal orgasm that is due to clitoral stimulation, and also to stimulation of the whole of the labia, the whole area around. The whole area becomes highly sensitized, but it's primarily through clitoral stimulation. which occurs in normal intravaginal intercourse. Am I making myself clear?
Yes, you are. Yes, you are.
Another very interesting finding that's come out now through Dr. Sherfey's work and Masterson Johnson's work and so on, but which women really should have known all along and probably did know all along, is that women need orgasms for their health every bit as much as men do. It used to be believed that a woman likes to delight the man she loves and so on, but it doesn't really matter too much if she's not satisfied. And the fact is that we now know that if a woman is regularly stimulated but not brought to orgasm, she develops many symptoms, including back pain, cramps, headache, nervousness, varicose veins, and moments of real pain. And
the whole syndrome of chronic pelvic congestion can lead to difficulties in the later life periods, too.
American doctors used to make a joke, and maybe some of them still do, but they would love to, gynecologists particularly, they would define the American female as, quote, a constipated biped with lower back pains. And at the same time as they were making these jokes, they would write repeatedly in their textbooks that women don't really need sexual satisfaction. In fact, the most popular, widely used gynecology textbook in the United States today, Novak and Novak, makes the following statement: a bride should be advised to allow her husband's sex drive to set their pace, and she should attempt to gear hers satisfactorily to his. So anyhow, here were these doctors making fun of us for having congestion in the pelvis area and all the symptoms that go with it, and at the same time claiming that we don't really need sex and we don't really need orgasms the way a man does. And boy, you know, they did some number on us. And we're not letting them do it anymore.
Does anybody know what our sexual potential is?
The sexual potential runs really a vast scale. Most women don't realize that their sexual potential is much, much greater than it has ever been conceived of before the studies of Masterson and Johnson came out. If a woman is continuously stimulated, either through group sex or through some other digital stimulation or other kind of artificial stimulation, she can have one orgasm after another. It has been scientifically clocked to 50 orgasms before she collapsed in complete exhaustion.
When I was writing Free and Female, and the women I interviewed, I did find one who'd gotten up to 14 successive orgasms, and fairly common were 3, 4, 5.
But there are many, many women who don't have orgasms at all.
This is another big issue. There are many, many women who do not have orgasms at all, and this is a function of, or can be a function of two things. One, her own personality problems with men, so that she can't give herself into sexual pleasure. She can't allow a man to satisfy her. And this gets into the whole area of the psychological causes of various degrees of frigidity, which I don't think are appropriate for us to go into on this program tonight. The other cause is that there has not been a sufficiently long period of foreplay in sexual stimulation to allow the great buildup of pelvic congestion that's necessary for her orgasm to be set off. Foreplay should be, on average, between 10 and 15 minutes. And a great many men don't want to spend that much time in foreplay.
I think lack of communication between the sexes is a very major third cause that I would like to add to that. The average American male thinks he knows a lot about sex from reading Playboy or whatever, and he has this regimen that he goes through. 3 minutes on this side, turn her over, 3 minutes on that side, and so on. And the fact is he's had a very poor sex education and generally does not reach adulthood with many sophisticated sexual skills. But in addition, he tends to be insulted if the woman indicates that she has special preferences. And what I learned writing Free and Female, and I had not realized it until I looked at all my interviews, is that no two women are exactly alike in their sexual tastes. In fact, it was amazing the range of things that turned some women on, and the same thing might turn a different group of women off. So that the only way that a man can really learn to become a superb lover with a given woman is not by reading Playboy, but by talking to that particular woman. She has to get over her shyness about sex, and of course it was used to be considered very brazen for a woman to talk about sex.
Well, isn't
and
it
then he
also
has to
difficult for
listen.
women to communicate their needs and their preferences? Do you
Well, I think, Sandy, that to those of us in the women's movement, anybody who's been through a consciousness-raising group that was at all successful, a good CR group, one of the great benefits is that we get comfortable with our own bodies and our own sexuality, and we can talk about it. And of course, in addition to the consciousness-raising groups, the bodies courses that are now given at so many women's health centers, again, gives women a knowledge of anatomy, a feeling of pride in their own bodies instead of shame. I think that men have always made us feel that because their bodies are different, they are less, that they got there first with the mostest somehow, because they have something visible that we don't have. Of course, we have a lot of magnificent internal structures that they don't have. But somehow this has communicated itself to little girls, and most little girls are grown up feeling that their bodies are somehow second-rate and a little loathsome, and it's hard for them to really focus on them or talk about them. But I do think that the women's movement is helping enormous numbers of women to get over that. We respect ourselves now. We're proud of our
I
bodies.
can't stress that point too much. I spend a great deal of time in my practice teaching people to talk under the sheets. And with many of them, both the men and the women, this is very difficult.
What's a good hint?
Join a consciousness-raising group.
No, well, everyone can't join a consciousness raising
Yes,
group.
they can. Anybody can start one among her own friends. That's the beauty of the women's movement.
I think that I try to give my patients words. I try to put some words in their mouths so that they can use them. Depends upon whether the patient is a man or a woman, but let's assume that it's a woman. She should indicate that it is it's necessary that they do talk more, that this is my advice, that they've got to talk more because I have said so, and that she has to tell him what pleasures her, what gives her pleasure, and that he has to do the same for himself with her. He has to say what gives him pleasure, and then they gradually begin to talk more and more about what pleasures them.
I don't knock psychiatry, certainly not Dr. Sherfey's psychiatry. And as you know, I'm married to a psychiatrist. But I must say that except for people who are just extraordinarily shy and inhibited,
There are a lot of them that are
I
in this
know.
whole area of sexuality.
but I have also known many women who had much more rapid change in these issues come about from being in a good CR group than had come about from years of psychiatric treatment. There is something about the concept of self-help, something about the model of other women getting in touch with their own sexual feelings and saying, yeah, to tell the truth, I really hate it when Charlie blows in my ear. And after 15 years, I finally told him I hate it. And he got furious and left the house, and but he came back, and we're working on things now. You know, and if you hear other women telling these stories and you're all sort of encouraging each other, truly getting in touch with your own feelings, it can make enormous changes.
There's a thing that a lot of people do, and they buy popular literature. And there's been a lot, and there always has been, and probably always will be. And they think they're going to learn something from it. What do you feel about that?
Well, there are a number of books that people can learn from, like Barbara's and mine.
Oh, thank you. I'm so honored to have mine included with you.
And actually, the more books on the subject that are published that are reliable, the better. But I think that by and large, when one gets down to the nitty-gritty, it's what happens between two people in their intimate relationship with each other. And you're going to learn a lot more by the experience of the whole thing than you are from reading any book.
To me, it's once women take off their patriarchal glasses, it's as if we've always been wearing dark-colored glasses that somehow diminish us as compared to men, and make us afraid and make us feel less than their equals. And somehow once you get those glasses off, everything in the world changes. You're just not afraid to present yourself as you really are to men anymore. You don't have to defer to them. You don't have to hide your real sexual feelings. It's like crossing a certain Rubicon, and it just makes an enormous difference.
In your book, you describe the sexual potential of women, and you say that the structure of the family was probably almost invented to contain that potential. Now that's a very sort of wild statement to make. Do you want to talk about that for about a minute?
Yeah, well, I was thinking about so many of the myths that have been in existence we've known about for so many years as to what prehistoric women were like, and it pictures them as highly sexual.
We have 1 minute.
Highly sexual individuals, and this was just a theory, and I think that it's one thing that I've come to realize since writing this book is that the really extraordinary potential of women for sexual experience does not interfere at all with their social abilities, with their abilities to relate to men, to love men, and with their abilities to bear children and to care for them properly. And I think that women's sexuality can be integrated into the monogamous family structure quite well.
How do you feel about monogamy in 15 seconds?
I feel very well. I feel very well about monogamy, and I think it is an institution that's going to be around for a long, long time.
Monogamy with equality.
On that note, I'll have to say good night. Thank you, Barbara Seaman. Thank you, Dr. Sherfey. Good night for women. See you next week.
Production funding provided by public television stations, the Ford Foundation, and the Corporation for Public Broadcasting.